At 18 years old, I was sentenced to serve 32 years in prison, even though that morning the sentencing guidelines had called for from 8 to 13 years and were then modified to call for from 10 to 16 years. So for crimes I committed just after my 18th birthday, I was sentenced to twice the high point of the sentencing guidelines. And people have asked how I didn't get lost in self-pity or anger at the judge or anger at the system or just this feeling that things are fundamentally unfair and therefore they don't matter, because that does happen to a lot of people inside. And I had my moments. I had those pits that I fell in that I didn't know how to dig out of. But the thing that really carried me through was the sense of shame I felt for the harm that I had created. I had committed a robbery and I shot two people unrelated to that, and thank God they lived, but that didn't minimize the harm or the pain they experienced or the harm or pain their family members experienced getting that phone call and rushing to the hospital. I created that harm. And the more I stayed in touch with that, the more I was able to not feel sorry for myself, because I remembered I was distinctly not the victim. I had created the victims in that situation. That being said, that sense of shame consumed me and it didn't make me better. It didn't drive me to change. Guilt is a bridge that we build to get somewhere else. Guilt is a bridge we do so that we can do better, we can live better, we can make amends, we can do things differently in our lives. And often that shame is just compounded and we stayed stuck on that bridge. We stay stranded for the rest of our lives. And that's what I saw as the alternative for a lot of guys in prison. Because a lot of guys never get over that bridge. They never get to the point they even accept responsibility. They label themselves as victims. And there are a lot of structural issues. Unless you've grown up in that home or that neighborhood or that environment that is traumatizing and unhealthy as a lot of these guys have, it's really easy to pass judgment, but it's really hard to understand the experiences they've had and the experiences that have shaped them and the norms that were introduced to their lives. When you grow up in a family where everybody is a gangbanger, in a neighborhood where everybody is a gangbanger, do you really expect this person to not be that? That's like saying, hey, I grew up in a home full of Christians, but now I'm a Hindu at 17. No, you may break away from that later in your life. You may grow and have different ideas, but it's very hard to break from those roots. It's very hard to break from the environments we were raised in. That's why the people that do, I think, are the true leaders. And I saw a lot of those inside where guys were able to reflect on their lives. They were able to reflect on where they'd come from. And they became the guys who led other people. They led other people to say, hey, this isn't how you have to live. This isn't the way you have to be. Like, you can create your own life. You can create your own identity. Unfortunately, again, a lot of guys don't get there. But again, that shame in a way that propelled me. And I think that we need to use not shame, but guilt. We need to use that accountability. The best program that I ever went to the whole time I was in the Department of Corrections was what's called the Victim Impact Program. And everybody sits in a room and you go through written testimony, visual testimony, and audio testimony of people who've been victims of crime. So someone describes their experience of having their place of business robbed, what that did to them, what they dealt with days and weeks and years afterwards. Someone describes the experience of being assaulted, everything you can possibly think of. And sitting there and listening to those people's words or reading those people's words or seeing their testimony is incredibly powerful. This was a room full of like convicts and lifers and guys who'd been through some stuff, and there was not a single dry eye in the room. And at the end of the class, the final class, was this woman who came in, who was in a wheelchair, who will never walk again because someone decided to drive drunk that night. And she told her story and she showed us. We're sitting there seeing her, and you cannot unsee that. You cannot just not feel that. Her family members came in, her mother came in to describe getting that phone call and not knowing if her daughter would live and watching them try to cut her out of the car with the jaws of life. If you want a life-changing experience, watch somebody tell their story and recognize that you could have been the person that caused that harm and that you're directly connected to the actions that caused harm that significant in someone else's life. That was a powerful process, and it was powerful for everybody in that room. And guys who maybe wouldn't have taken responsibility in the past had no choice. That hits you like a ton of bricks. And forcing people to have that accountability, forcing people to come face to face with the harm they've created is the way we create change, because there is no change without accountability. And that was the only time in the entire 19 years that I was locked up that I was asked to talk about what I had done. I was even given the opportunity in a therapeutic setting to talk about what I had done, how it made me feel, how I struggled with guilt, how I struggled with seeking redemption. The fact that that isn't the fundamental core of our process of rehabilitation or a process of incarceration shows that we have no idea what we're doing. Rather than saying, okay, let's talk about what you did. Let's talk about what you got there or how you got there, what got you there. Let's talk about the changes you're making in your life. That's not a part of the process. We don't do that in prison. Instead, we warehouse people. We lock them in there and get them to get jobs in the kitchen making 27 cents an hour to meet their basic needs. That's not going to make somebody better. That's like taking a kid who's done something wrong, sticking him in timeout, and never talking to him, never explaining to him like, hey, this isn't okay. I understand why you did this, or I understand how this happened. We need to do things differently. Like, how are we going to do things differently? We don't give people different skills. We don't help them take responsibility. We don't help them get another perspective on life. It's the prisoners. It's those leaders that I was talking about before that introduce guys to the idea of an alternative life, of a different way to live and a different thing to do. It's not the prison system. It's not the staff. And that's what breaks my heart, because there are some really good staff members, but they're the ones who stick out above and beyond. We had an electrical teacher who probably changed more lives than any DOC staff member I have ever seen, and it was just because he cared. He would take a personal interest in guys' lives, and he would say, hey, I want to make sure you get a job, so we're going to talk. As soon as you get out the door, like, call this number, call this person, let's get you connected. And guys would get jobs and then call back, or they would connect with him and be like, man, like, I just got a traveling electrician job making $35 an hour. Like, nobody in my family's ever made $20 an hour. This is amazing. He organized a job fair where employers from all over the state brought their guys in and paid them to come tell their stories and talk about how they believe in second chance employment. And a lot of the guys who went to that job fair had never believed they could get a job other than like Hardee's or going back to the streets. They never had any idea that, hey, what do you mean I can get trained to be a heavy equipment operator? What do you mean I can get trained to do this? What do you mean these people will pay me to learn how to do this job? What do you mean they're going to give me this job and benefits, and they're going to help me with housing because they know I'm struggling getting out of prison? He opened so many doors. But that wasn't the system. That was one man who really cared. And to this day, I'm incredibly thankful for Mr. Sykes, because he changed a lot of lives, and he changed my life. So when I think about that, like, why are we doing what we're doing? Why do we have a system where I'm the outlier, where I'm the one who had access to the support and resources and the extraordinary people that helped me become the person I am today? Why is that not the focus for everybody? Like, it just blows my mind that we even have these conversations and that we have these comments where people say, well, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Bro, like, happy, healthy people don't commit crimes. People don't just say, you know what, I think I'm going to go do this incredibly unhealthy, damaging, hurtful, thoughtless thing today. People who are in pain, people who are in throes of mental health crises and addiction, people who are traumatized do these things. People who grew up not believing they have any other options do these things. That's what breaks my heart. And to think about that, that was the story that I was telling. And we had a reentry class where we had one of the members who was of a partner organization was just murdered. And so this is what I talk about. We had 4 UVA football students who were killed. It was this incredibly traumatic thing. 2 other students were shot, and the entire city shut down. There were candlelight vigils. Everything was closed in their honor. Like, there were moments of silence at every event for months. They were remembered. They were lifted up. That guy who was murdered, I mean, there was a candlelight vigil in his neighborhood. Nobody else in the community even knows his name. Nobody cares. So we've created this dialogue where some people are worth remembering and other people aren't. Some people have value in their lives and are told from the very beginning that they have value. Other people are told from the very beginning that they don't. So when people start acting as if they don't have value, or their lives don't have meaning, or their lives don't have hope, that's more than that, just that person. That is a structural issue. That is a way we treat communities, and we treat people in those communities. And until we start saying that every person's life has value, until we start lifting up every voice, the other people that see that, the kids that grew up next to that kid who was murdered, they're not going to believe any different. They have no reason to. No one has ever shown them that they matter. No one has ever shown them that they have a good life ahead of them. And oftentimes the first time that happens is when they get locked up and one of those old heads say, hey man, you can live a different way. But by that point, it's often too late.